the heart of one of America's most unforgiving deserts, a seasoned veteran set out on what should have been a routine trip only to vanish without a trace. Bob Warner, a 76-year-old Vietnam War veteran, had made countless pilgrimages to the remote hot springs of Death Valley's Saline Valley, seeking solace in the harsh landscape he had come to love. But on May 4, 2021, something went horribly wrong. His truck was found abandoned, his phone left behind, and his camping gear untouched. Yet Bob was nowhere to be found. What began as a simple rescue mission for a broken-down vehicle would spiral into a mystery that would haunt his family and authorities for years. Was it a tragic accident or something darker at play? The answers lie buried in the desert, where the truth waits to be uncovered. Bob's story is more than just a tale of a missing person. It's a chilling puzzle that forces us to question the systems that failed him and the untold secrets of the vast wilderness. Thank you for choosing my video among thousands of videos out there to watch. Helping me with a subscription of yours is very small but very big and too valuable. The morning of May 4th, 2021 started like any other. In Apple Valley, California, Cindy kissed her husband Bob goodbye at 7:45 a.m. She was heading out to babysit their grandson, and Bob was preparing for his usual trip to the remote Saline Valley Hot Springs in Death Valley. He packed his supplies into his trusted Ford F pickup truck, looking forward to the quiet sanctuary of the desert. They had a routine, and Bob had promised to call Cindy once he reached Big Pine, a small town, before entering the wilderness where he would inevitably lose cell service. They had been through this countless times before. At 2:29 p.m., just like clockwork, Cindy's phone rang and Bob's familiar voice came through the line. "I'm about to head into Saline Valley," he said, calm and reassuring as always. It was a brief, almost routine call, just enough to let her know everything was fine. There was nothing extraordinary in his words, no hint that anything was wrong. Bob Warner was no stranger to the desert. Known to his friends as Badwater Bob, he had spent years making pilgrimages to Saline Valley's hot springs, finding peace in the harshest of landscapes. Saline Valley, with its natural pools and towering mountains, was accessible only by treacherous dirt roads capable of destroying vehicles. This wasn't a destination for casual tourists. It was a place for those who sought solitude and adventure. Bob had found both. The hot springs were a haven, offering the rare luxury of warm water amidst the unforgiving desert. He would soak in the pools, enjoy a beer and swap stories with his best friend, Chuck Stman, under the vast, endless desert sky. For Bob, this wasn't just a getaway. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the world's noise and find comfort in the quiet solitude of the desert. But this trip was different. It wasn't just about soaking in the hot springs or relaxing in the desert. Bob had a mission. A month earlier, during Easter weekend, Bob had driven his Dodge Ram pickup truck into the valley, but had become stranded when the radiator blew, leaving the truck behind like a forgotten relic of metal bleached in the sun. He had left it with the campground host and hitched a ride back to civilization. But the truck haunted him. Bob was a man who didn't leave things unfinished. He spent the next few weeks planning his return. This time, he would fix the truck and bring it back. He meticulously packed his tools and supplies, ensuring that he was ready for the repair mission. It was a simple plan: replace the radiator, get the truck running again, and return with Chuck to convoy both vehicles home. Everything was prepared, and the trip was supposed to be a simple 3-day affair. Little did Bob know, the desert had something much darker in store for him. The Saline Valley he had come to know and love would soon reveal its hidden dangers. Veterans like Bob knew the importance of preparation. Bob had lived through the horrors of Vietnam, raised a family, and navigated 76 years of life's challenges. He wasn't a man to rush into anything unprepared, but the desert is a place where even the most experienced can be humbled by forces beyond their control. The journey he had set out on was about to become a nightmare. The desert's merciless landscape, its silence and its unrelenting heat would test everything he knew about survival. What was supposed to be a routine mission was about to turn into an enigma, one that would puzzle investigators and torment Bob's family for years to come. The drive to Saline Valley was no easy feat. The 55-mile stretch of dirt roads leading to the hot springs could take nearly 3 hours, and it wasn't a road for the faint of heart. As the afternoon wore on, Bob's Ford pickup truck carved its path through the desolate desert. The sun was beginning to set, and the temperature was dropping slightly, but the night would soon take over, casting the desert into an almost total darkness. As Bob neared the valley, he was just another solitary figure navigating the endless wilderness. Around that time, a camper who was already settled at the hot springs spotted headlights in the distance, Bob's truck cutting through the black void of the Saline Valley. It was a pitch-black night, and the waning moon wouldn't rise until the early hours of the morning. In that kind of darkness, even familiar terrain can become alien, disorienting, and deadly. The desert, which had always welcomed Bob, was about to swallow him whole. After Bob's truck was spotted, something went wrong. Sometime after dark, the camper who had seen the headlights never saw Bob again. The next morning, Lee Greenwell, a local known around the valley as Lizard Lee, noticed Bob's truck parked near the bathroom facilities. The sight immediately struck him as odd. The keys were still in the ignition, dangling as if abandoned in haste, and Bob's cell phone sat on the seat useless, in a place where there was no cell service. The truck's windows were dusty, but the scene didn't suggest a sudden departure. It was as if Bob had simply vanished. There were no signs of struggle, no tracks in the sand, nothing to explain where he could have gone or why. His camping gear was still there, untouched, indicating that he had not planned to leave the site at all. It was as if he had evaporated into the desert air. The questions began to mount. Where could he have gone in this vast wilderness with no landmarks, no shelter, no way to hide? As the day wore on, and no one had seen or heard from Bob, Lee contacted park rangers about the abandoned truck at 8:19 a.m. The first report was sent, followed by another email at 10:37 a.m. But nothing was done. Time, which in the desert can be the difference between life and death, ticked away. Yet the park rangers didn't arrive to investigate until 3 full days later, on May 7th, late in the afternoon. 3 days in the sweltering heat, and still no action had been taken. Bob's family was left waiting, confused and desperate for answers. When Cindy, Bob's wife, was finally notified, she was told the rangers needed to complete their investigation first before she could be told anything. More waiting, more delays. By then, the temperature in Death Valley had soared into the 90s, and with each passing hour, the chances of finding Bob alive grew slimmer. When Park Service spokesperson Abby Wines was asked about the delays in response, her answer was chillingly bureaucratic. Abandoned or disabled vehicles were common occurrences in Death Valley National Park. To her, Bob's case was just another instance in a long line of common occurrences. For Cindy, this was like a slap in the face. The words "common occurrence" had reduced her husband's life to nothing more than a statistic. Time was slipping away, and the desert was swallowing her husband, but the system seemed indifferent. It wasn't until the evening of May 8th, 4 days after Bob disappeared, that park officials finally reported him as missing to the sheriff's office. 4 days, 60 hours had passed. In that time, the desert's heat could have already claimed Bob's life. Bob's phone call to Cindy at 2:29 p.m. that afternoon was brief but reassuring. His voice came through calm and steady, just like it always did when he was on one of his trips. He told her he was about to head into Saline Valley, a place he knew well, and that everything was fine. There were no signs of distress in his voice, no mention of anything unusual. It was the kind of call Cindy had heard many times before, just a routine check-in. Bob had always kept her in the loop during his travels, and this call was no different. He promised to call again once he reached Big Pine, a small town where he would lose cell service as he entered the heart of the wilderness. With that, the conversation ended, and Cindy continued her day unaware that it would be the last time she would ever hear her husband's voice. As the hours passed and Bob didn't call back, Cindy's concern began to grow. But it wasn't until the next morning that her worst fears would be realized. The phone call, which had seemed so ordinary at the time, had turned out to be the final communication before Bob disappeared into the vast, unforgiving desert. The next morning, the eerie silence of the desert was broken when Lee Greenwell, known around the valley as Lizard Lee, noticed Bob's truck parked near the bathroom facilities. At first glance, everything seemed normal, until he saw the keys hanging from the ignition left behind without a care, and Bob's phone resting on the seat useless in a place far from any cell service. The sight struck him as strange. Bob, a seasoned visitor to the valley, would never have left his truck unattended without some indication of where he had gone. His camping gear, which included the necessary tools for his mission to fix his broken truck, was still neatly packed and untouched. It was as if Bob had stepped out for a moment and vanished into thin air. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no evidence to suggest that anything out of the ordinary had happened. It was as if he had simply evaporated into the dry, still air of the desert. The presence of the keys in the ignition was especially puzzling. Bob was the kind of man who always locked up when he left his truck, even if it was just for a few minutes. That morning, however, everything was left wide open, an unsettling detail that hinted at something far more mysterious than a simple misstep. The truck, usually a symbol of Bob's preparedness, now sat alone and abandoned in the desert with no trace of its owner. Greenwell, alarmed by the sight, knew something was wrong. He quickly contacted the park rangers, but their response would be far slower than anyone could have imagined. The longer the truck remained untouched, the more the mystery deepened, leaving Bob's family and everyone familiar with the area wondering where had he gone and why had he disappeared without a trace. It was as if the desert itself had swallowed him whole, and now the haunting questions began to take shape. How do you disappear in a place where there's nowhere to hide? Where do you go when you're lost in a vast wilderness with no landmarks or clues? The search for Bob was only just beginning, and the answers were already slipping further away into the shadows of Death Valley. The discovery of Bob's abandoned truck on the morning of May 5th should have set off an immediate search. However, as the hours passed, no search teams were deployed to look for the missing man. Lee Greenwell, alarmed by the situation, had sent an email to the park rangers at 8:19 a.m. that morning, notifying them of the truck's strange abandonment. He followed up with another email at 10:37 a.m. But even with these early warnings, there was no immediate response. The park rangers, instead of rushing to investigate the potential danger, waited. 3 full days passed before they arrived at the hot springs to investigate the situation. 3 days where Bob could have been fighting for his life in the brutal desert heat. By the time rangers arrived on May 7th, the window of opportunity to find Bob alive had already closed. The desert's unforgiving climate, with daytime temperatures soaring into the triple digits, meant that every passing hour made it less likely that Bob was still out there alive. It wasn't just the absence of immediate action that caused concern, it was the lack of urgency. The desert was known for its extreme temperatures, and when someone disappears in such an environment, time is a matter of life and death. The failure to act quickly to mobilize search teams immediately meant that critical hours were lost. Bob's family and friends waited helplessly as the authorities seemed content to treat the situation with indifference. Each day that passed, the possibility of finding him alive diminished, and the chances of recovering his body grew. The real horror for Cindy, Bob's wife, was the sense that her husband's disappearance wasn't being treated with the seriousness it deserved. To the park rangers, Bob's case seemed like just another instance of an abandoned vehicle, something they claimed was common in Death Valley National Park. They seemed to dismiss the urgency of the situation, not recognizing the human life behind the report. By the time the search was finally initiated, the desert had already claimed its toll on Bob's chances. What should have been a swift, coordinated effort to find him had been delayed for days, leaving the family with nothing but mounting frustration and fear. As the hours turned to days, Cindy was growing desperate. The delayed response, the lack of urgency, and the indifferent attitude from the authorities left her feeling helpless and increasingly frustrated. The park rangers had treated Bob's case as a routine, almost dismissible event, categorizing it as just another abandoned vehicle in a remote area, a common occurrence in Death Valley, they said. Cindy couldn't fathom how her husband's disappearance had been reduced to such a mundane status. Bob wasn't just another elderly man wandering off into the desert. He was a husband, a father, a Vietnam War veteran, and someone who had served his country with honor. Yet his case was brushed aside as though he didn't matter, as though his life was less valuable simply because of his age. The authorities' bureaucratic indifference stung deeply, and it became painfully clear that Bob's life was not a priority to those who were supposed to be helping him. When Cindy tried to get more information, the responses from the authorities were maddeningly vague. The sheriff's office, when contacted, insisted that park rangers needed to complete their investigation first. Even when Cindy demanded answers about her husband's whereabouts, the responses were slow and bureaucratic. It felt as if the system was designed to protect its own procedures, not to protect people like Bob. The longer the search was delayed, the more Cindy became convinced that the authorities weren't treating Bob's case with the seriousness it deserved. To them, Bob was just another old man who had wandered off, and they expected him to turn up on his own. It wasn't until May 8th, 4 days after Bob had gone missing, that park officials finally reported him as a missing person to the sheriff's office. 4 days, 60 hours on. The hours had passed without any real effort to find him. In a place like Death Valley, where temperatures can kill in hours, that delay was unforgivable. Cindy's voice cracked with heartbreak and anger as she reflected on the authorities' lack of action. Her husband's life had been reduced to a set of bureaucratic procedures, and by the time the search was finally launched, it was too late. The desert had already claimed its toll. What had started as a rescue mission was now a grim search for answers. Bob's family was left to deal with the painful reality that due to the system's failures, they might never see him alive again. The desert, vast and unforgiving, had swallowed Bob whole, and the system designed to protect him had failed him in his most desperate hours. In the days following Bob's disappearance, the search efforts seemed to stall, and the mystery surrounding his vanishing deepened as authorities continued their investigation into the abandoned truck. Something eerie was discovered, an unsettling message scratched into the dusty windshield of Bob's Ford pickup. It wasn't a simple note or a hurried scrawl. It was a deliberate, cryptic message that read something like, "You're searching for me, but I'm not here." The message seemed to mock everyone involved in the search, taunting them with the knowledge that someone somewhere knew far more than they were letting on. The words sent a chill down the spines of those who read them, especially Cindy and her family. It was as though someone had left a message just for them, as if to suggest that the search was futile, that Bob was gone, and they would never find him. The discovery of the message raised disturbing questions. Who wrote it and why? Was it an act of cruelty, a sick joke designed to torment the family? Or did the message imply something far darker, that someone knew exactly where Bob was and had deliberately hidden the truth? The tone of the message was chilling, and its implications were profound. For Cindy, it felt like confirmation that her husband's disappearance was not a simple accident. Someone, she was convinced, was deliberately withholding information, keeping secrets buried as deep as the desert sands. The message, added a layer of sinister intrigue to the case, transforming what might have been a tragic accident into a possible crime. It was as though Bob's disappearance had become a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit each clue, raising more questions than answers. Cindy's gut told her this wasn't just about an elderly man getting lost in the desert, it was something far more insidious. She became convinced that foul play was involved, and the message on the windshield only fueled her suspicions. As weeks turned into months, the haunting words left behind on the dusty glass remained a stark reminder that Bob's story was far from over. Nearly 2 years after Bob Warner vanished in 2023, a breakthrough occurred, a small but significant discovery that would reignite hope and bring new clarity to the mystery. While investigating Bob's case, journalist Stuart Jeff stumbled upon a weathered sandal about 1,000 feet from where Bob's truck had been abandoned. The sandal, worn and showing signs of severe damage, was immediately recognized by Cindy as belonging to her husband. As soon as I saw the picture, I knew it was his shoe, Cindy said, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and renewed grief. Bob had always worn those sandals, and seeing them again so close to where his truck had been left behind was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. The discovery of the sandal was a physical piece of evidence that had been missing from the case for nearly 2 years. It confirmed something that Cindy had feared: Bob had never made it home from that dark night in the desert. The condition of the sandal suggested something far more troubling than just a routine desert mishap. The sandal was badly torn, showing signs of catastrophic failure, as if tremendous force had been applied suddenly and violently. This pointed to the possibility that Bob had fallen and injured himself in the darkness, likely while navigating the treacherous terrain after parking his truck. In the pitch-black desert night, it was easy to imagine how someone could take a wrong step, misjudge the ground, and fall hard. For a frail 76-year-old man like Bob, such a fall could have been devastating: a broken leg, ankle, or hip injuries that would leave him unable to move or call for help. The damage to the sandal painted a vivid picture of the fall, and in Cindy's heart, it confirmed her worst fears. Bob, injured and disoriented, had likely crawled into the desert, hoping to find shelter or help. The desert, however, offers no mercy. Jeff, working on a theory that Bob had become disoriented after stepping out of his truck in the pitch black of night, retraced Bob's likely path. Wearing similar sandals and clothing, he attempted to follow what might have been Bob's footsteps. The path led him to a series of convoluted gullies and rocky terrain, which may have been the same route Bob took that night. What Jeff discovered was both haunting and heartbreaking. He speculated that Bob, after the fall, had crawled into one of the nearby caves or rock formations in a desperate attempt to escape the searing desert heat. The scorching sun would soon rise, and Bob, in his weakened state, would have sought shelter wherever he could find it. But the cave system in the area was unpredictable, and after heavy rains and flash flooding in July 2021, the caves had become unstable. It was possible that Bob, in his weakened condition, had taken refuge in one of these caves, only to have it collapse around him, entombing him forever. The discovery of the sandal, combined with the cave theory, pointed to the heartbreaking possibility that Bob had been so close to rescue, yet so far from help. The delays in the search, the slow response from authorities, and the failure to adequately cover the search area all seemed to compound the tragedy. The sandal, a piece of evidence that might have been discovered earlier, could have been the key to finding Bob alive. But now it seemed the desert had claimed its final victim, and Bob's remains lay hidden beneath rock and sand, sealed away by forces beyond his control. As investigators delved deeper into the mystery surrounding Bob Warner's disappearance, a chilling theory began to take shape. A theory that would in many ways offer a possible explanation for what happened to Bob after he vanished into the dark desert night. Based on the location of the sandal and the terrain in the area, the prevailing theory was that Bob, disoriented and injured after his fall, had crawled into one of the nearby caves or rock formations for shelter. In the oppressive heat of the desert, where temperatures soared to unbearable levels during the day, the relative coolness and shade of a cave would have provided much-needed relief. Bob, weakened by his injuries and the loss of his bearings, would have been desperate for any kind of cover, any place where he could escape the searing heat and rest long enough to regain his strength. However, the desert is as unpredictable as it is unforgiving, and the safety of these caves was illusory. After the heavy rains and flash flooding that struck the region, in July 2021, investigators believed that the cave systems in the area may have become unstable. What had once been a possible refuge for Bob now became a potential death trap. The combination of Bob's weakened state, the searing desert heat, and the eventual collapse of the cave could have sealed his fate. It's believed that Bob, after seeking shelter in one of the caves, was trapped when it collapsed around him, burying him forever. The desert, in a final act of brutality, may have taken what little remained of him and hidden it beneath tons of rock and debris. This theory, though plausible, remains unproven, as the collapse of the cave and the eventual entombment of Bob's remains would have been nearly impossible to detect during the initial search efforts. For the investigators and the Warner family, the cave theory painted a haunting picture of Bob's final moments. If he had fallen and been injured, disoriented in the darkness, the chances of survival were slim, even before considering the dangers of the desert. The collapse of the cave would have sealed any hope of recovery. In the search's aftermath, as authorities combed the area and aerial units scoured the land above, no signs of Bob were found. The question loomed large. Why hadn't the searchers found him if he was so close to where his truck was abandoned? The truth may lie hidden beneath the rubble, forever concealed by the unforgiving desert landscape, locked away by a combination of natural forces and human oversight. Despite the unanswered questions and the frustration that permeates the case, Bob Warner's story continues to live on. His disappearance, tragic as it was, has become more than just another missing person case. It has highlighted the very real dangers of remote wilderness and the consequences of bureaucratic delays in search and rescue operations. Bob's death may have been a result of a series of unfortunate events, but his story also exposes how systems which are supposed to protect and serve can fail those who need them the most, especially when age or isolation makes one more vulnerable. Bob's disappearance is a reminder of the delicate balance between life and death in the wilderness. The desert, beautiful and unforgiving, can claim a person in an instant if proper precautions aren't taken. What should have been a routine rescue mission turned into an agonizing search for answers where every day's delay could mean the difference between life and death. For Bob's family, it became a fight not just for his life, but for justice and acknowledgement. His wife Cindy refused to give up the fight. Despite the bureaucratic indifference, the slow response from authorities, and the lack of closure, Cindy kept Bob's memory alive, sharing his story with anyone who would listen. It was this determination, this unwavering commitment to her husband's memory, that ensured Bob would not be forgotten. Through her efforts, Cindy pushed the case back into the public eye, asking the hard questions and demanding accountability from those who were supposed to help. It is through her resilience that Bob's disappearance has become a catalyst for broader conversations about wilderness safety, search and rescue procedures, and the importance of prioritizing vulnerable individuals, especially the elderly in remote areas. While the mystery of Bob Warner's final resting place remains unsolved, his story serves as a poignant reminder that every life matters, and that some mysteries, no matter how much time passes, demand to be solved. As the search for Bob continues, and as new pieces of evidence, like the sandal and the haunting message on the windshield, come to light, the case serves as a symbol of the dangers that lie within the wild. For those who venture into such unforgiving terrain, Bob's legacy is a reminder that preparation, quick action, and respect for the power of nature are crucial. His story continues to be shared, not just as a tragedy, but as a call to action, a demand that we never forget those who are lost in the wilderness, and that we strive to do better in the face of danger. For Bob, and for all those who have been claimed by the desert, we must remember they deserve to be found, they deserve justice, and their stories deserve to live on. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Your support truly means the world to me. If this video brought you value or resonated with you in any way, feel free to leave a little comment or hit subscribe so we can keep sharing more moments together. See you in the next one.